A man appeared in a window on the second floor, flames behind him, and he was waving, not for help, but as a signal. And before the world could fully process what it was seeing, black-clad figures were already moving. Ropes dropped from the rooftop. Stun grenades punched through glass. And in 11 minutes, one of the most audacious rescue operations in the history of modern warfare was over, broadcast live into the living rooms of tens of millions of people who had absolutely no idea what they were witnessing until it was already done. It was the 5th of May, 1980. The Iranian Embassy in the heart of London had been held for 6 days by a group of armed individuals demanding the release of political prisoners. Inside were 26 hostages, diplomats, journalists, a police officer. Outside, camera crews from every major broadcaster in the world had set up for what they assumed would be a slow, grinding negotiation. Nobody was filming because they expected action. They were filming because the standoff had become a story. What they captured instead became history. The British Special Air Service, a unit whose name most people had heard but whose capabilities almost nobody truly understood, had been watching, planning, and waiting. When the order came, they moved with a speed and precision that left everyone watching, from the cabinet minister sitting in the operations room to the television presenter on live air, unable to fully form words. One moment there was a building under siege. The next it was over, and the world had watched every second of it. What you are about to hear is a full story of how that day unfolded, who the men were, what they knew going in, what went wrong, what went right, and why. More than 4 decades later, those 11 minutes remain the single most defining public demonstration of elite special forces capability in the history of armed conflict. To understand why May 5th, 1980 carried the weight it did, you need to understand the world that existed around it. Britain in 1980 was a country under enormous pressure. The previous decade had been defined by economic turbulence, industrial disputes, and the relentless grinding violence of the conflict in Northern Ireland. The IRA had brought bombing campaigns to mainland cities. The public's confidence in the government's ability to keep them safe had been tested repeatedly. Political violence was not an abstraction. It was a recurring feature of daily life, and the institutions meant to prevent it were under sustained scrutiny. Into this environment came a crisis that was, on the surface, not a British problem at all. On the 30th of April, 1980, 6 armed men entered the Iranian Embassy at Prince's Gate in Kensington, took the building and everyone inside a hostage, and announced their demands to the world. They were members of a group seeking autonomy for the Arab-speaking region of Khuzestan in southwestern Iran. Their grievances were with the government of Ayatollah Khomeini, not with Britain. But they were on British soil, in a British street, and the hostages included a constable from the Metropolitan Police named Trevor Lock, who had been on duty at the front desk. When the men forced their way in, the Metropolitan Police took initial command. Negotiators were deployed. A telephone line was established. For 6 days, the situation held in an uneasy, grinding stasis. Demands made, rejected, modified, made again. The hostage-takers released a small number of people as a gesture of goodwill. They gave interviews through intermediaries. The media set up an encampment outside and began the long process of turning a hostage crisis into a broadcast event. Cameramen with long lenses filmed every visible window. Reporters delivered live updates from behind police cordons. What the cameras could not see, and what nobody outside a very small circle of government and military knew, was that from the first day of the siege, a team of operators from 22 SAS had established a forward operating base in a building adjacent to the embassy. They had already been inside the empty building next door. They had drilled through walls and threaded microphones and fiber optic viewers into the fabric of the embassy itself. They knew the floor plans. They had rehearsed the assault on a replica built elsewhere. By day 3, they had a plan. By day 5, that plan was ready to execute on command. The SAS at this point in its history was not a household name in the way it will become after this day. The regiment had been reconstituted after a period of post-war uncertainty, had served with extraordinary distinction in Malaya and Oman, and had been quietly developing the counterterrorism capability that would define it for the following decades. The unit known as the Counter-Revolutionary Warfare Team, the Red Team, trained specifically for hostage rescue scenarios. They had drilled the Iranian embassy layout until they could move through it in darkness, under fire, with stun grenades going off around them, and still hit every designated target accurately. They were ready. They had been ready since day 2. The moment that changed the calculus came on day 6. One of the hostage takers shot a hostage, Abbas Lavasani, the embassy's press attaché, and pushed his body out the front door. The negotiation was over. The British government, represented in the operational command room by Home Secretary William Whitelaw, made a decision that had been sitting in a file marked ready for 6 days. The Metropolitan Police handed primacy to the military. The order was given, and somewhere in the building next door, men began to pull on black flame-retardant suits, strap on respirators, check their weapons one final time, and move toward the rope points on the roof. Inside the embassy, the 26 hostages were living in a state of controlled fear that shifted unpredictably between moments of relative quiet and episodes of genuine terror. Some of the hostage takers were calm, almost professional. Others were erratic, prone to sudden anger, their behavior difficult to read and impossible to predict. Constable Trevor Lock maintained a composure that observers later described as extraordinary. Engaging the leader of the group, a man known as Own, in conversation, managing the interpersonal dynamics of the situation with a skill that was not part of any training he had ever received. The BBC journalist Sim Harris, one of the hostages, later described the experience of those 6 days with detail and clarity that brought the interior reality of the siege into public understanding in a way that no external account could. He described the sound of helicopters overhead, part of the deliberate noise strategy deployed by the SAS to mask the sound of their preparations on the roof and in the neighboring building. He described the way the phone calls with negotiators created a kind of rhythm to the day, a sense that as long as the phone was ringing, nobody was going to die. He described the moment the phone stopped. The decision to kill Abbas Lavasani was the pivot point. Owen had been making increasingly desperate demands. The negotiators had run out of meaningful concessions to offer. The hostage takers' original demand, the release of prisoners in Iran, was something the British government had no power to deliver, and Khomeini's government in Tehran had made clear it had no intention of engaging. The situation had reached its terminal point. When the gunshot came and the body was placed at the door, the people in the command room understood immediately what it meant. The machinery that had been standing at readiness for 4 days was activated. What the hostages inside heard in those final minutes before the assault was the sound of someone cutting through the skylight above them. Muffled, controlled, methodical. A sound that did not fit the building. A sound that said, with complete clarity, that something was about to happen. Some of the hostages moved instinctively toward the floor. Some pressed themselves against walls away from the windows. Constable Lock, who had known since day 1 that an assault was being prepared, understood exactly what was coming. He positioned himself near Owen and waited. The world outside had no idea any of this was unfolding. The cameras were still rolling, as they had been for 6 days, pointed at a building where nothing appeared to be happening. A BBC outside broadcast vehicle was transmitting live. The presenter was filling time, discussing the latest in a long series of inconclusive negotiation updates. And then at 7:23 in the evening, the building was no longer quiet. The assault began simultaneously on multiple levels of the building. Abseiling teams came down from the roof on ropes. Entry teams hit the rear of the building at ground level. A third element addressed the front. Stun grenades, designed to overwhelm the senses with light and sound without causing lasting physical harm, were thrown through windows on 3 floors within the first 90 seconds. The noise was enormous. The light was blinding. Inside, everyone who heard it, hostage and hostage-taker alike, experience a physical response that no amount of preparation or expectation can fully override. The human nervous system does not distinguish between a real explosion and a stun grenade. The body reacts the same way. One of the entry points produced an immediate complication. A member of the assault team became entangled in his abseil rope against the rear of the building. The rope had wrapped incorrectly during the descent. He was hanging, unable to continue, directly in front of a window. His colleagues below him made a critical, instant decision. They set fire to the curtained room to draw the attention of anyone inside away from their entangled teammate. The fire spread faster than intended. Suddenly, the building was not only under assault, it was burning. The entangled operator was cut free and pulled to safety by teammates who abandoned their own entry roles to reach him. Inside, the assault was moving at a pace that the hostage-takers could not process. The stun grenades had disrupted every cognitive function required to mount an organized response. Operators were moving through rooms before the dust had settled, using voice commands, physical positioning, and the total authority of speed and shock to control every space they entered. The hostages were identified, pulled to the floor or pushed against walls, and physically guided toward exit routes. There was no pause. There was no hesitation. The operators had rehearsed this so many times that the building had ceased to be unfamiliar. Even in smoke, even with fire, even with live rounds being exchanged. Constable Lock, true to the composure he had maintained for 6 days, had tackled the group's leader as the assault began. Holding Owen against a wall and preventing him from detonating a grenade he was reaching for. When the SAS operators reached that room, Lock was physically restraining a man who was trying to arm an explosive device. The operators made the only decision available to them in that moment. The threat was neutralized. Lock was pulled clear. All 25 remaining hostages were evacuated safely from the building. From the moment the first rope dropped to the moment the last hostage was out of the building. 11 minutes. 5 of the 6 hostage-takers were killed in the assault. 1 was captured. The one British fatality of the entire operation, Abbas Lavasani, the hostage murdered hours before the assault, was the only life lost among the people the SAS had been sent to protect. Every person inside that building who was meant to come out alive came out alive, and the whole world had watched it happen. The broadcast footage of the Iranian Embassy assault was not planned. Nobody had arranged a filming position inside the police cordon. What existed was a result of camera crews who had been pointed at a building for 6 days and happened to still be rolling when 11 minutes of history unfolded in front of them. The images they captured, black-suited figures on ropes, stun grenades flashing through windows, smoke billowing from the rear of a Grand Victorian terrace, circulated within hours across every major news network on Earth. They have never stopped circulating. The effect on public understanding of what the SAS was and what it could do was immediate and permanent. Before May 5, 1980, the regiment was known primarily within military and government circles, and to anyone who had read the relatively sparse published accounts of its operations. After that evening, it was something else entirely, a name attached to an image of capability that the public had now witnessed with their own eyes. Recruitment inquiries to the British Army increased sharply. A generation of young men would grow up with the Iranian Embassy assault as the reference point against which they measured what elite military service meant. The political consequences were equally significant, though less visible. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who had authorized the operation and watched its execution from the operations room, was photographed afterwards with the assault team. She described their performance publicly as a source of immense pride for the country. The success of the operation reinforced a philosophy of decisive response to political violence that would define British security policy for years. It also sent a message to every organization that might consider a similar action on British soil. The response would be proportionate, professional, and final. For the men of the SAS who conducted the assault, the aftermath was a return to anonymity. Their identities were not released. Their names did not appear in the newspapers. They went back to Hereford. They trained. They waited for the next operation. The regiment had learned, as it always learns, from everything that had gone right and everything that had gone wrong. The entangled abseil rope, the fire that spread further than intended, the moments where the plan had met reality and required instant adaptation. Every one of those things was examined, discussed, and absorbed into future training. The single capture hostage taker was tried, convicted, and served a prison sentence in Britain. The surviving hostages returned to their lives, changed by what they had experienced, each carrying the weight of 6 days in that building in ways that took years to fully understand. Constable Trevor Lock received the George Medal for his conduct throughout the siege. Sim Harris wrote about his experience. The others navigated their return to ordinary life with varying degrees of ease. The building was repaired. The embassy reopened. The street at Prince's Gate went back to being a quiet, expensive corner of West London, where nothing remarkable ever happened, except that everyone who passes it knows exactly what happened there, And everyone who saw it live or has seen the footage in the decade since knows that on the evening of May 5th, 1980, they watched something they had never seen before and would never quite see again in the same way. A government making a decision, a unit executing a plan, and a crisis ending not with the slow, exhausting process of negotiation, but with 11 minutes of controlled, deliberate, extraordinary action. Here's the question I want you to sit with. If the cameras had not been there, if this had happened in darkness with no broadcast footage, no live transmission, no images circulating by the following morning, would the world understand the SAS differently today? Would the regiment's reputation be what it is? Does the fact that we saw it change what it means? Drop your answer in the comments below. There are no wrong answers here, and some of the most interesting perspectives on stories like this come from people who were not military, not British, and not watching in 1980. People who encountered this footage for the first time and have a reaction that those of us who grew up knowing this story have forgotten how to have. I genuinely want to read what you think. If you are watching this on the Deep Insight channel for the first time, welcome. This is what we do here. We take the stories that shape the world, the ones that deserve more than a headline and a 2-minute clip, and we give them the full treatment they earned. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you are here when the next one drops. Share this if someone in your life needs to see it. And if you have been here for a while, thank you. You are the reason this channel exists.